and decide again, quite possibly coming to the conclusion that it made the right decision in the first place. Bill Casey, CBC News, Ottawa.
The Prince and Princess of Wales have flown back to Britain, ending their 5-day tour of the United States. They departed from Palm Beach, where last night they were guests at an exclusive charity ball. The tab at the ball was $10,000 a couple. At the airport, there was tight security and only about 100 admirers as they boarded the RAF jet. Prince Charles will return to the United States next September to help Harvard University celebrate its 350th anniversary. The first motion pictures ever made of Halley's Comet, or any comet, have been taken in California. The pictures show Halley's Comet racing towards the sun with various stars passing in the background. The comet does not yet have a tail, but it will develop one as it approaches the sun and the sun's energy begins to break particles off the comet's surface. The comet is actually white. It's been color enhanced by a computer. The pictures were made at a University of California observatory on Mount Hamilton near San Francisco. Computers attached to the telescope tracked the comet all night long, and one picture was taken every few minutes. There were 474 pictures in all. They were then put together to make the moving picture sequence.
And we did it because it's fun, I think, not for any great scientific reason, but it's something that was fun to do.
Halley's Comet is near the orbit of Mars. In the next few months, it'll pass by Earth, go behind the sun, then pass the Earth again. Manitoba is tackling a very serious problem facing many senior citizens. It's a problem that, until recently, not many people talked about, much less knew about. But now, the abuse of the elderly is recognized as one of Canada's major social problems. And the government of Manitoba is planning to bring in the most comprehensive law in Canada aimed at preventing elderly abuse. Jane Chalmers reports.
They're alone and helpless, victims in their own homes. As many as 1 in 10 elderly people are beaten, threatened, robbed of their pension checks by a family member. This woman says she was threatened, says her life savings were taken away by her family. She doesn't want to be identified.
It wasn't just the money, it was the hurt, the betrayal, that you were taken.
She's afraid, a feeling shared by thousands of elderly people trapped in this situation.
I was very ashamed. I felt so degraded. Besides, I loved them so dearly and trusted them so implicitly.
They come in with bruises, cuts, broken bones, dehydration, malnutrition, skin sores.
But that abuse is often only discovered in hospital emergency wards. Finding it doesn't mean a solution. Doctors and social workers are helpless if the old person wants to go home, back to the abuse.
Who makes the decision to step in and say, okay, you're in an abuse situation and I've decided that you can't take this anymore?
It's very frustrating for us because we know that they are at risk, but they do have the final choice.
We as people in the caring professions know that help cannot be given in many cases.
In Winnipeg, people who see the problem firsthand are meeting to talk about legislation in the works. There are 3 proposals. A public guardian who could remove the victim or abuser from the home.
The guardian could decide that the woman was going to go into the hospital and get some proper medical attention.
A partial trustee to investigate financial problems and even manage the victim's money.
And a computerized registry that would list victims and details about suspected abusers. The list would go to hospitals and social service agencies. The legislation is just now being drafted, but already the Manitoba government expects some legal battles ahead.
If you attempt to move an elderly person out of an abusive situation, you could be potentially infringing their freedom of association.
So Canada's Charter of Rights could be the largest hurdle for this new legislation, that the rights of elderly people go up against new laws to protect them. Jane Chalmers, CBC News, Winnipeg.
And that's the National for Wednesday, November 13th. For CBC News, I'm Knowlton Nash. I'll be away for the next couple of days, and Peter Mansbridge will be sitting in. We'll have regional news later. Now, the Journal.
Controlling AIDS. Should the courts crack down on carriers? From San Francisco and Ottawa, assessing the options. Cranking up Massey Ferguson.
Isn't it time?
A streetwise pinstriper hauls an ailing giant out of debt. The dilemma over childbirth. Is modern medicine wrong? The pros and cons of the cesarean section. The Journal with Barbara Frum and Bill Cameron.
For doctors, the terrible facts of AIDS have become all too familiar. But for the courts, the issues associated with AIDS are presenting a brand new subject, full of dilemmas like the victim's right to privacy versus his partner's right to protection from the disease.
Take the case of Rock Hudson. He concealed his AIDS infection until a few months before his death. Now a man who says he was Hudson's lover is suing the actor's estate for $10 million. The case will hinge on a crucial question. Is an AIDS victim obligated to warn those he might infect?
To talk about that question, we are joined by Dr. Dean Eckenberg of the San Francisco Department of Public Health and by Bernard Starkman, an expert in medical law at the Federal Department of Justice. Gentlemen, of course, we can't comment on a pending legal case, but it is amazing that so soon someone has decided they deserve a legal remedy for being deceived. I want to know from you first, Dr. Eckenberg, if you think people have a right to legal action against those who knowingly spread AIDS.
I think we have to understand the entirety of this disease before you can comment on a particular aspect like this. AIDS is spread primarily through sexual contact here in San Francisco, and I think through most of the country. Therefore, the spread of AIDS involves a consensual act. I don't think you have anybody being infected today and not knowing it.
But that sounds an awful lot like if you get AIDS, it's your own fault.
Well, I think today, people who are getting AIDS, who are getting the infection through a sexual contact or through sharing needles, are taking a very serious risk.
Mr. Starkman, what's the legal situation in this country? It's been a crime in the past to spread certain communicable diseases. Is this one included?
Well, the history of this is that there still is, in fact, a provision in the criminal code which prohibits a person from knowingly communicating venereal disease. But the venereal disease that is covered by the code is only gonorrhea and syphilis and soft chancre. And that section is scheduled for repeal shortly.
Do you think AIDS should be added?
Well, let me finish. The problem is that historically we know of only one reported case under an earlier form of that criminal law prohibition. And in that case, the person did in fact die, and there was a conviction. But the problem is, first of all, it was under another slightly different form of the section. And the other problem is, how do you show causality?
Dr. Eckenberg, beside this case that hit our news today, two recent cases, one involving a male street prostitute who tried to move to another town when everyone in his town knew he had AIDS. In another case, a woman with herpes has been allowed to go to court to sue a man who deceived her. Is that the right trend?
In terms of AIDS, I think the main intervention has to be educating everyone how they can put themselves at risk. And then I think once we've done that, and people want to persist to put themselves at risk, I think we might not like it, but we're dealing with a different situation.
But are you, Dr. Eckenberg, telling homosexuals to be chaste? All of them?
Yes, I think that is perhaps the crux of our intervention. Here in San Francisco, for many years, we've been telling all gay men, in fact, anyone in the classic risk groups, whether they're gay men, whether they're intravenous drug users or hemophiliacs, to assume that they're infected and to assume that they're infectious, and that they should take steps to prevent the transmission of this disease, either acquiring it or giving it to others. So whether a gay man knows whether he's positive or not, he should be taking precautions as far as spreading this disease. And the same thing holds true for hemophiliacs or intravenous drug users.
But how can you say that a whole class of individual has no right to a sexual life?
Well, I think it's not a matter of rights. We're dealing with an infectious disease here. And I think actually the gay community here in San Francisco has been working very hard with the health department to make sure that all gay men are practicing safe sex.
Mr. Starkman, if we think the onus should be on the homosexual to restrain himself, does he at least have a right to the data that we have about AIDS? We don't even make it mandatory to report that someone has AIDS, to trace his contacts. Do we have an onus on ourselves to give this person a fighting chance?
Well, the answer is, I think, first of all, that in some of the provinces, it is mandatory to report AIDS now. And the controversy is whether or not it's also mandatory to report seropositive tests. And I think the figures are something like only 5 out of 100 of those cases ever go on to become full-fledged AIDS cases.
All right, but Mr. Starkman, is it mandatory to then find out who that person's sexual partners are? It could be his wife, for example, that doesn't know he's bisexual.
Well, that's a very interesting question. I have seen, in other countries, I've seen the advice given by officials that it's a matter of confidentiality, and in precisely the circumstances you raised, I've seen the advice given that they should definitely not tell the wife. Now, I think it resolves itself to basically to the question of contact tracing, which is an old one in the communicable disease field. That is, should you go to the partners in order to warn them of the problem and thus prevent them from transmitting the disease further? There are opinions on both sides. Some people do not believe in contact tracing. Other people do.
All right, let's get a last thought on that point. Dr. Eckenberg, do you believe in contact tracing? Should it be mandatory to inform a person's partners?
Again, I think that it's important in some groups where the prevalence is very low. Where the prevalence is high, I'm not sure that contact tracing is the way to proceed. For example, in San Francisco, where in gay men, 50% are already infected. That means 1 out of every 2. I think the best means of intervention is a mass education campaign. Whereas with heterosexual contacts to gay men, for instance, the prevalence is less than a fraction of a percent. And there I think it's important to try to locate these individuals so that we can educate them and counsel them on an individual basis so they wouldn't be spreading that disease unknowingly for many years.
Gentlemen, we thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. When we return, crunching numbers at Massey Ferguson.
That number is 85% lower.
You can hide what's happening, feel the electric air. Something's moving, something's changing. You can feel everywhere. There's an easy stick of patience, taking life down inside. Knowing when to swim up river, when to drift with the tide. It's a new attitude. There's a new attitude. There's a new attitude. Easy going course, it's a whole new attitude.
Look how it glitters, look how it shines. Consumers find jewelry at Christmas time.
A treasured symbol, superbly crafted rings in 10-karat gold. Choose either modern tritone or start a family tradition with a personalized family ring. Compare the quality and the price of these beautiful men's and ladies' 10 and 14-karat gold wedding bands.
A time for loving. Consumers find jewelry. A time for giving.
The Jewelry Boutique at Consumers.
They gave it a 4-cylinder, 16-valve jewel of an engine, and the most sophisticated suspension outside the racing world, and even a rear aerodynamic wing. Then they gave it a name, the Mercedes-Benz 2.316. And the rest is performance history, or soon will be. The new 2.316. For 1986, Mercedes-Benz widens the gap.
Lately, we've heard a lot about bankruptcies and bailouts in corporate Canada. But occasionally, an executive emerges in the world of big business who has the ability to heal an ailing corporation and save it from extinction. Lee Iacocca did that with Chrysler in the United States. And in Canada, Victor Rice may have done it with the Massey Ferguson Company.
3 years ago, the world-renowned farm implement company was losing hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Last year, it turned a profit. Tonight, the Journal's Susan Reisler profiles Victor Rice, the man from Massey.
Reaping the harvest, a time-honored tradition, a tradition that follows cycles which are almost biblical. Throughout this century, the manufacturers of farm machinery expected 4 good years and 3 bad out of 7. No longer. Good harvest or bad, this is the 9th consecutive year farmers and machinery manufacturers have watched their profits blow away. In Toronto, Canada's largest farm equipment company, Massey Ferguson, struggles to ride out the hard times.
What I keep doing is writing why. Yeah, on the bottom of page 3, it talks about retail demand is now 6% below last year.
Yep.
But in fact, cumulatively, that number is 25% below last year.
There's silence as Victor Rice, the chief executive officer of Massey Ferguson, highlights some bad company results during a working lunch.
Otherwise, I'm left with the feeling that it really isn't down very much, when in fact it's, as far as it impacts on us, is down dramatically.
Second quarter results show the division that makes Massey's combine harvesters has lost $18 million. But the news doesn't dampen the management team's appetite. Massey is a lean company today. Rice has trimmed away plants, workers, and debt. It's no longer on the brink of bankruptcy.
When I took over, this company had no chance of survival. Today, there are at least 20,000 direct employees of this company who have a job because of the effort that I and my management team put in.
The company was done, and so we'll agree on that. And Victor Rice saved it from demise.
Michael Graham, a financial analyst, has followed Victor Rice's career at Massey.
And he did it. He's a confident individual. He's what's the word? It's not cocky. He's not cocky. He's jaunty.
If he appears cocky, too, though, Rice might be forgiven. Born in England, he's the son of a chimney sweep. He quit school at 16, started work as a mail clerk. He rose to become the youngest chairman of Massey Ferguson. Now 44, his salary is over $600,000 a year. Rice almost single-handedly saved the country's oldest and largest multinational manufacturing company from extinction. Now, as he continues to trim and reshape it, according to his own image, Massey Ferguson may soon be unrecognizable. Victor Rice has proven he's part of the Massey tradition. For almost 140 years, this company has been run by strong men, men with a vision. All of them, including Victor Rice, have faced the same problem. How to beat the boom and bust cycles, how to keep this company afloat and intact. That's the legacy of the company's founder, Daniel Massey, the man who made the Massey name synonymous with agricultural machinery. 20 years before Confederation, Daniel established the Massey Manufacturing Company to produce farm tools. And as Canada's agricultural economy grew, so did the Massey Company. By the late 19th century, it had become a multinational concern. 4 generations of Masseys turned the company into one of the world's largest manufacturers of farm equipment. Then they got out of the business. Raymond Massey became an actor, Vincent a diplomat, then Governor General. They left as hard times hit the company. The Dust Bowls dried up crops and the Depression dried up sales. Now called Massey Harris, the company struggled through these hard times under new leadership. The war helped put it back on its feet. The company had the tools, the country had the workers. 4 months after Britain and Canada declared war, Massey Harris was making war material. And Massey was making a comeback, turning a profit, and in the process attracting the attention of a company called Argus Corporation. Led by E.P. Taylor, these men didn't care about the Massey tradition, just cash. Argus ruled over some of the best times at Massey. At its peak in the mid-70s, this Canadian-based multinational conglomerate operated 49 plants in 11 countries. Its products were sold in 165 countries and territories. It produced everything from office furniture to heavy equipment and diesel engines. For 30 years, everyone was happy.
And then things began going wrong. The debt to equity, when you borrow as much as they did, was all this while Argus Corporation was standing behind them. What could be greater than that? And then what happened? Recession, markets going one way, interest rates through the roof, the debt equity load crushing, and that's when it all went wrong.
The power behind Argus and Massey at this point was Conrad Black. In 1978, he picked Victor Rice, the chief financial man at Massey headquarters, to be the new president. Black hoped Rice would make Massey Ferguson profitable again.
I took over right at the end of 1978, and the company then made the then largest losses in the history of Canadian business, subsequently being beaten by a number of other companies. And you know, the publicity was adverse, but here was a new man, fairly unknown, in charge. Conrad Black was in the company, so a lot of focus of attention.
Black made Victor Rice president, then chairman. But Rice never really controlled Massey as long as Conrad Black was in the picture.
Tonight, Massey Ferguson's biggest shareholder bails out of the money-losing farm machinery company.
October 1980. Conrad Black gave up on Massey. He gave the Argus controlling shares to the Massey pension fund for $1. He's never said why, but Argus got a big tax break for its losses. Rice was finally the boss now, but his company, Massey Ferguson, was bankrupt. By 1980, Massey Ferguson owed $1.6 billion. It couldn't even pay the interest on this money. The largest single loan was $360 million. Owed right here to the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. But Massey owed tens of millions more to banks all around the world. For over a year, Rice traveled the world like a corporate salesman.
The bank meetings that we had yesterday morning, what did you think of those? So I think it was exceedingly good. We're saying.
He had to convince the banks not to foreclose on his company. It was the most ambitious corporate refinancing ever undertaken. Nobody before had ever tried to refinance debts with 250 banks and 3 governments.
Significant changes to that since we last talked.
There's no changes at all.
In the period of the refinancing, there was no doubt that Rice was the driving force behind everything.
Peter Cook is the author of a history, Massey at the Brink.
At that time, he had inexperienced vice presidents, and all decisions were being made by Rice. And at the same time, you know, he was traveling constantly, and so the whole company was being run by this guy on the telephone from London or Nairobi or Des Moines or wherever he happened to be.
The heaviest negotiations took place in New York and London. Though hostile, the bankers were no match for Rice's persuasive powers.
It was a question of